The champagne was still cold in my hand when my future mother-in-law looked me dead in the eye and told me the caterers were supposed to use the service entrance. I want you to picture it. Late September in the Berkshires, that gold light that only happens for about 20 minutes before sunset, the kind that makes everything look like it costs more than it does. I was standing on the stone terrace of an estate that had been in his family for 4 generations, wearing a slip dress the color of oyster shells, because the actual gown was hanging upstairs in a guest room, zipped into a garment bag, waiting. My hair was down, no veil yet. No ring on display because I tucked it into my clutch so it wouldn't catch on the fabric during the final fitting. I looked, I suppose, like a woman who could have been anybody. And to the woman walking toward me across that terrace, I was nobody. Her name was Glennis Harrow Vance, and she said her full hyphenated name the way some people say a player, like it conferred protection. She was 61, silver blonde, dressed in a sage green suit that probably cost more than my first car, and she had the specific kind of beauty that money keeps polished, long after nature would have let it go. I had seen exactly one photograph of her. One. My fiancé Reese had a complicated relationship with his mother, and in the 11 months we'd been engaged, every single attempt to arrange a meeting had collapsed. She was traveling. She was unwell. She was at the lake house. She was, it turned out, simply avoiding the inevitable, because Reese had told her almost nothing about me except that I existed and that he intended to marry me. So when she crossed that terrace and saw a Vietnamese woman in a plain dress holding a champagne flute near the bar setup, her brain did the math it had been trained to do its whole life, and it came back with an answer that made her comfortable. Excuse me. She didn't say it like a question. Are you with the catering company or the florist? Because the floral team was supposed to clear the terrace 40 minutes ago, and frankly, the centerpieces are wrong. I opened my mouth. I genuinely did. I was going to say, I'm the bride. It would have been so easy. But here's the thing, I've never been able to fully explain to anyone, not even to Reese, not even to my own sister on the phone that night when I caught her shaking with something between rage and laughter. In the half second after she spoke, I watched her eyes move over me. They went to my dress, to my shoes, to my face, to my hands, and at no point did they consider the possibility that I belonged at the top of this wedding instead of behind it. And I thought very clearly, with a calm that frightened me a little, I want to see how far this goes. So I closed my mouth, and I smiled the smile I use on difficult patients, the one that gives away nothing. The centerpieces, I said, tell me what's wrong with them. I should explain who I am because it matters for what comes next. I'm a trauma surgeon. I was 31 that autumn, 6 years out of residency, and I had spent those 6 years learning how to stay completely calm while everything around me fell apart. You learn in that work that panic is a luxury. You learn to keep your face still and your hands steady while a man's blood pressure crashes, while a family screams in the hallway, while a clock runs out. I had reassembled people who had been thrown through windshields. I had told mothers that their sons were gone. I was very, very good at not flinching. Glennis Harrow Vance had no idea who she was talking to. She thought she was talking to the help. The peonies are too open, she said, gesturing at the arrangements with 2 fingers like she was conducting. They look like they're about to drop, and whoever decided on the gold chargers should be fired. We discussed champagne tones. This is a wedding, not a TGI Fridays. I'll have a word with the lead, I said. See that you do. She looked at me a moment longer, and then, almost as an afterthought, she added, Where are you from, originally? There it is, I thought. The question, the one I have been asked at gas stations and gala dinners and on the first day of my surgical fellowship by an attending, who then spent the next year being shocked that I was competent. There's a particular weight to originally. It means I have already decided you are not from here. Sealand, I said, which is true. I grew up in a Vietnamese family on the west side of Cleveland, the daughter of a woman who did alterations out of our living room, and a father who drove a delivery truck for 30 years and never once missed a day. Originally, she made a small sound, not a laugh, a kind of exhale through the nose. Of course you did, she said, and walked away. I stood there holding my champagne and I felt the thing crystallize in my chest. the decision that would carry me through the next several hours. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to cry or storm upstairs or make Reese choose between his mother and his bride on what was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. No. I was going to let Glenys Harrow Vance dig her own hole. I was going to hand her the shovel and keep handing it to her. And I was going to be standing at the edge of that hole when she finally looked up and understood where she was. I found Reese 10 minutes later in the library, fixing his cufflinks in the reflection of a glass cabinet. He turned when I came in, and his whole face changed the way it always did. That soft, surprised look like he still couldn't quite believe I'd said yes. And I loved him so much in that moment that I almost told him everything. Almost. There you are, he said. Did you eat anything? You always forget to eat. I met your mother, I said. He went still. When? Where is she? I wanted to be there. I told her 4 o'clock at the. She doesn't know it was me. I watched his face. She thinks I'm with the catering company. She asked me to fix the centerpieces and then asked where I was from. Originally. I will tell you exactly what Reese did because it's the reason I married him, and it's the reason this story doesn't end the way you might be bracing for. He didn't laugh it off. He didn't say, that's just how she is, or she doesn't mean anything by it, or any of the 1,000 things people say to smooth over a thing that should not be smooth over. His jaw tightened, and his eyes went hard and bright, and he said, very quietly, I'm going to go end this right now. And I put my hand on his chest. No, I said, not yet. Listen to me. If you go out there and confront her now, in front of 300 people, you'll be the villain. She'll be the victim. She'll cry, and your aunts will comfort her. And by Thanksgiving, the story will be that the new wife came between a mother and her son. I've seen this exact movie. I am not going to spend the next 40 years being the woman who ruined the wedding. I straightened his collar. My hands were perfectly steady. Let her show everyone who she is. All I have to do is let her keep talking. He looked at me for a long moment. Then something I can only describe as awe moved across his face, and he started very slowly to grin. You're terrifying, he said. You proposed. I did. He kissed my forehead. Okay, we do it your way. But the second you want me to step in, you look at me, and I'm there. Deal. So here is how the next 2 hours unfolded, and I swear to you on my surgical license that every word of it is true. I went back out onto the terrace and I played the part. I told the actual catering lead, a kind exhausted woman named Dolores, that everything looked beautiful and to ignore anyone who said otherwise. I drifted, I refilled my own champagne, and every time Glenys Harrow Vance found something to complain about, she found me because I had become, in her mind, the competent brown woman whose job it was to absorb her displeasure. She told me the string quartet was playing too loudly. She told me the bathroom attendants needed to refold the hand towels. At one point, she handed me her empty glass without looking at me, the way you'd set something down on a table. And I took it, and I carried it to the bar, and I came back, because I wanted the witnesses. I wanted her own people to see her do this, and they did. That was the thing she never accounted for. Her sister Pamela saw it. Her oldest friend, a sharp-eyed woman named Constance, who I would later learn had buried 2 husbands and suffered no fools, saw it. Reese's grandmother saw it, and his grandmother, a tiny, ferocious woman of 88, who everyone called Gran, was watching the whole thing unfold from a wicker chair by the rose arbor with the delighted expression of someone at a very good play. The worst of it came about 90 minutes in. I was standing near the head table when Glenys cornered me by the seating chart, and her voice dropped into something confidential and poisonous. Can I tell you something between us? She said. She'd had 2 glasses of wine by then and her cheeks were flushed. My son is marrying one of them. I haven't even met her. He won't show me a picture. You know what that tells me. It tells me he's ashamed or he's been trapped. These girls, they're very clever about it. They find a man with a good family and she made a little grasping gesture. I've told him there's still time. The deposits aren't that much. I want you to understand that I did not feel anger in that moment. Anger is hot and fast and stupid. What I felt was cold and patient and almost peaceful, the way I feel when a difficult case finally reveals itself, when I can see the whole shape of what's wrong and know exactly what I'm going to do about it. And if you met her, I said, and she wasn't what you expected, what then? She waved a hand. It wouldn't change anything. People are what they are. Yes, I said, I'm finding that's true. She didn't catch it. They never do in the moment. She just patted my arm, and said, "You're a sensible girl. You understand," and walked off to terrorize a waiter. At 5:45, the wedding coordinator, the real one, a wonderful woman who had been let into the secret an hour earlier and was now barely holding herself together, announced that the bridal party would be getting ready. And would all guests please find their seats in the garden for the ceremony at 6:30. I went upstairs. I want to tell you about the gown because I'd chosen it carefully and now it meant more than it had when I bought it. It was not a quiet dress. My mother and I had picked it out together over video call, her squinting at the screen from her sewing room in Cleveland. And when I turned in the boutique mirror, she put her hand over her mouth and cried, and the saleswoman had cried, and I had stood there feeling like the most beautiful version of myself that had ever existed. It was ivory silk with a high neck and long sleeves of hand-beaded lace and a train that took two people to manage, and it was unmistakably, undeniably the dress of a bride. There was no mistaking the woman wearing it for the health. There was no mistaking her for anything but exactly what she was. My father had flown in the night before. He doesn't say much, my dad. 30 years of driving a truck, and he expresses love mostly through fixing things and showing up. But when I came out of the dressing room in that gown, he stood up from the chair he'd been sitting in and he straightened his tie, and his eyes were wet, and he said, "Kongai Sabah, my daughter." And then he couldn't say anything else, and that was enough. That was everything. We lined up. My father took my arm, the music started, and we walked out into the garden where 300 people were waiting, and at the front, beside my husband-to-be, stood Glenys Harrow Vance in her sage green suit, turned toward the aisle with a polite, expectant smile fixed on her face, ready to finally lay eyes on the woman who had trapped her precious son. I watched her find me. I watched her smile waver as her eyes registered the gown, and then climb to my face, and then, I will remember this for the rest of my life, I watched the exact moment the math broke. The moment the answer her brain had given her on the terrace turned out to be wrong. She had told the help where she was from. She had handed the help her empty glass. She had described in detail to the help her plan to break up her son's engagement to one of them. And the help was walking down the aisle in a wedding gown on her father's arm. The color left her face. I have seen people go into shock, real physiological shock. And this was the social equivalent, a kind of full body realization that drained her right down to the lips. She reached out and gripped the back of the nearest chair. Beside her, Reese was looking at me with tears already running down his face, the steadiest, happiest tears, and beside him, Gran in her wicker chair that someone had carried to the front, was grinning like a wolf. I reached the end of the aisle. My father placed my hand in Reese's. And before the officiant could say a word, Reese turned not to me, but to his mother. He took her hand, gently, and he said, loud enough for the front rows to hear, in a voice that shook only a little, "Mom, I want you to meet my Nai, my bride. She's a trauma surgeon. She saved 4 lives last Tuesday." He paused. "I'm told you two have already spoken." The silence was enormous. You could hear the garden, the breeze, a bird somewhere, 300 people not breathing. Glenys Harrow Vance looked at me, and to her credit, or maybe just because there was nowhere left to run, she didn't deny it, she didn't pretend. Her mouth opened and closed, and then, in a small cracked voice that I almost felt sorry for, she said, "I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said. That was rather the point. The ceremony happened. We got married under an arch of those 2 open peonies that Glenys had hated, and they were perfect. And when Reese kissed me, 300 people stood up, and the sound they made went straight through my chest. I cried. He cried. My mother, on a video call propped up in the front row because her health hadn't let her travel, sobbed openly into a tissue. My aunts crowded around the screen. It was, despite everything, the most joyful day of my life. But I know what you're really waiting for. You want to know what happened with the mother in law. Because a wedding is an afternoon, but a family is the rest of your life. Here's what happened. Glenys did not run away. I'll give her that. She sat through the entire reception with the dazed expression of a person whose understanding of the world has been structurally damaged. And during the dancing, when I had a moment alone refilling a water glass, old habits, she came and stood beside me. I owe you an apology, she said. Her voice was different now. Smaller. I owe you 1,000 of them and I don't know where to start. I could have been gracious. I could have said it's all right or let's start fresh, or any of the soft, forgiving things that would have let her off the hook and let everyone go back to being comfortable. But I had spent my whole life being gracious to people who had decided what I was before I opened my mouth, and I was done. You don't owe me an apology for what you said to the wedding planner, I said. You owe me one for being a woman who would say those things to anyone she thought couldn't fight back. The fact that it turned out to be me, that's just luck. You didn't get caught being cruel to your daughter in law. You got caught being cruel to someone you thought was beneath you. Those are different sins, and the second one is worse. She flinched like I'd struck her. And then, slowly, she nodded. You're right, she said. I want to be honest with you, because this is where the made for TV version would tie everything up with a bow, and life doesn't work like that. We did not become close. There was no tearful reconciliation in the months that followed, no montage of us baking together at Christmas. What there was instead was something harder and more real. Glenys started doing the work. She sent a letter, handwritten, 4 pages, to my parents in Cleveland, apologizing to them, which I had not asked for and did not expect. She came to dinner at apartment, and she ate the buntraku my mother had taught me to make, and she asked questions about it that were clumsy but sincere. She drove 4 hours to sit in the surgical waiting room the day I operated on Reese's grandmother, Ran's hip. Nothing fatal, but Glenys was there at 6 in the morning with coffee, and when I came out of the OR, she stood up so fast she knocked over her chair. It took years. It is, honestly, still taking years. We are not the same as a family that never had this happen. But I have learned that the apology that matters isn't the one said in the moment of getting caught. It's the 1,000 small corrections after, the choosing over and over to be better than the person you were on that terrace. Reese asked me once, late at night, why I let it go as far as I did, why I didn't just tell her on the terrace and spare us all the tension of that afternoon. I thought about it for a long time. Because if I'd told her, I said, she would have apologized for the wrong thing. She would have been embarrassed. She'd offended the bride. She'd have spent the whole day being careful with me because of who I turned out to be. I didn't want her to be careful with me. I wanted her to see, clearly, with her own eyes, the kind of woman she's capable of being when she thinks no one important is watching. Because that woman was always going to be in our lives in some room at some point, deciding what some other person was worth. I needed her to meet that woman too, and I needed her to be ashamed of her. Reese was quiet. Then he pulled me closer and said, remind me to never ever play chess with you. We have a daughter now. She's 2. She has her father's eyes and my stubborn chin, and she calls Glenys Glammy, and Glenys reads her books in funny voices, and would, I genuinely believe, lie down in traffic for her. When I watch them together, I feel something complicated that I've stopped trying to untangle. People are not only the worst thing they ever did, but they're not absolved of it either. Both things are true, and you have to hold them at the same time. And that holding is most of what family actually is. Last month, Glenys and I were at a charity luncheon. Her world, not mine, but I go now, sometimes. A woman at our table, someone Glenys has known for 30 years, leaned over and said, gesturing vaguely at me with the same 2-finger flick I remembered, and is this one of your girls who helps with the foundation? And before I could say a single word, Glenys set down her fork. This, she said, in a voice that could have cut glass, is Dr. Mai Harrow Vance, my son's wife. The finest surgeon in this state and the best thing that ever happened to our family. She let the silence sit there for one perfect, brutal beat. Why don't you tell her where you're from? Originally, I almost dropped my water. Some debts, it turns out, do get paid, just not always in the currency or on the schedule you expect. The thing I keep coming back to years later is how easy it would have been to just tell her on that terrace, one sentence, I'm the bride, and none of what came after would have happened. But I've learned that the choices that change your life are rarely the loud ones. They're the quiet decisions you make in a half second when something in you says, wait, watch, see this clearly before you act. What Glenys did on that terrace didn't come from nowhere. People don't wake up cruel. She had spent 61 years in rooms where her assumptions were never once corrected, where the brown woman holding a tray really was the help, where nobody she'd insulted ever turned out to be someone who could look her in the eye as an equal. Her cruelty was a habit that had never met a consequence. And consequences, real ones, are the only thing that ever actually teaches us. I didn't punish her. I just stopped protecting her from herself. I let her see the woman she became when she thought no one important was watching, and then I made sure the person watching was the daughter-in-law she'd have to look at across the dinner table for the rest of her life. I think about the steadiness it took to stand there and absorb it without flinching. That steadiness wasn't a gift I was born with. I built it, one terrible shift at a time, in trauma bays where panic gets people killed. The same thing that lets me keep my hands still while a man bleeds is what let me keep my face still while Glenys handed me her empty glass. You don't get that calm for free. You earn it by staying in hard rooms longer than is comfortable, and the version of me who could do that on my wedding day was made of 1,000 harder days before it. But the part I'm proudest of isn't the patience or the nerve. It's the line I refused to cross. I never lied to her. I never humiliated her with a crowd at my back. I gave her the truth in her own time, and then I gave her something most people in her position never get, the chance to actually change, and the refusal to pretend she already had. Letting her off easy would have been the cruelest thing of all, because it would have left her exactly as broken as she started. If you take anything from my and Reese, and even from Glenys, take this. Be the kind of person whose decency doesn't depend on who's watching or who they think you are. Build the inner steadiness to stay calm when everything in you wants to burn it down. And when someone wrongs you, have the strength to demand they become better instead of just making them sorry. Those three things together are most of what a good life is made of. The rest is just showing up again and again and choosing them when it would be so much easier not to.